Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about game balance inside of Pokemon Unite, because it's something that I've never done before. We're starting with a joke. Hi, Jake, your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw. What I wanted to talk to you about today was good balance inside of Pokemon Unite, what that would look like exactly, and what we've kind of dealt with for the past few months inside of Unite, which has been strangely good with a glaring problem. There's no question that it's more and more difficult to balance a roster of Pokemon inside this game once you start to get more and more characters. We almost have 65 Pokemon inside this game, and obviously you're not going to have every single Pokemon be completely relevant at all times. Even if Pokemon were all, in theory, completely balanced, still the way a Pokemon's playstyle interacts with another playstyle would mean that something is just better than another. You can never expect that every single Pokemon is exactly at a 50% win rate. It's just never going to happen. In fact, I think what a more realistic expectation would be is that most Pokemon are pretty good. There are a few Pokemon that are kind of shining in the moment, and then there are a few Pokemon that could use some love, and that continues to fluctuate as you go through the game. One thing is for sure, the most recent balance inside of Unite has actually been pretty good outside of, well, legendary Pokemon, which are pretty bad. That's a whole topic that I've talked about a million times. There isn't much else to say about it except the concept of legendary Pokemon and EX Pokemon inside of Unite don't really work. I think they know they don't really work, but it's a Pokemon thing, not a MOBA thing, and I wish those two would just like divorce. It's done. We don't need EX Pokemon inside this game. It's cool to have these Pokemon, but they need to be as good as everything else in the game. Again, I've talked about EX Pokemon at length. I want to talk about what good balance would look like inside of Pokemon Unite and how we're actually pretty close to it with a few of the recent patches. I think if we want to look at good balance inside the game, a good balance patch would do a few things. I'm going to talk to you about each of these things right now. The first thing it would do is alleviate pain. This is one of the most important things that can happen inside of a balance patch, is that Pokemon that are kind of ruining the game from a balance perspective and usually from an enjoyment, like fun level perspective, get toned down. The next thing a good balance patch would do is enhance the fun you are having with certain Pokemon. We'll talk more about that in a second. I think you would also want to elevate things that are obscure inside the game, which is very important. You would want to give Pokemon moments, which I think is a really key part to balancing a live service game in an exciting way. And then finally, you would want to balance simply for the sake of it. You would want to balance to simply shake up the meta and make a live service game more exciting, so that the next time you log in, or if someone's been away for a couple weeks, they come back and they go, oh wow, I had not seen these Pokemon played a lot, and now all of a sudden we're seeing them inside the game. It gives the game an element of vibrancy. There's life to it. There's something happening. The game has ebbs and flows. This is this Pokemon's meta. Now it's another Pokemon's meta. As long as you do that without making it insane, I think Mewtwo, you can have a great live service game with exciting updates. Let's talk about a recent patch in Unite and how they nailed a few of these things and then missed a few. In the most recent balance patch inside of Pokemon Unite, we had nerfs to Glaceon, Umbreon, Inteleon, Clefable, Miraidon, and not Buzzwole. So they missed one right there. But they nerfed almost every single notorious pain point Pokemon inside the game. And they actually didn't gut them, which I think is pretty great. It's a nice balance patch. Even though on a few of these they definitely could have done more, they addressed every single thing that was giving players the most grief inside the game, at least by some degree. From a pain point balance perspective, it was like an 8 out of 10. Pretty good. They missed Buzzwole. They missed a couple other like really strong things, but in general, I think they did a really nice job with the sort of first part of what you could look at as a balance patch, which is alleviating painful things inside the game. Honestly, solid effort. They also did a nice job of elevating some obscure things inside of Pokemon Unite. Now, these are mostly fixes, which is something I didn't mention in a balance patch, but sure, you would also want to fix things that you bugged or broke or something like that. But they took Scyther, Charizard, and Greedent, and they all tried to elevate them a little bit out of obscurity. And for Scyther and Scizor, it actually worked really well. well. I would say the attempt is really nice here, but I'd maybe give this like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 because there are definitely more Pokemon that they could have tried to affect with this, and I don't think they went far enough on any of these Pokemon outside of Scyther and Scizor to really make them more relevant inside the game. In a moment like this, what you would want to do is you want to take a look at the roster inside of Pokemon Unite, and you'd want to go, all right, we got 60 Pokemon, okay? What are 10, 15 maybe, that are just not getting play, not performing that well, and how can we buff all of them a little bit and in interesting ways so that they make themselves more relevant inside the game? Their buffs to Scizor and Scyther I think were really solid. Charizard and Greedent both almost feel like bug fix buffs, where these Pokemon are fine, but could still definitely use some love if you want to elevate them out of their kind of obscure positions inside of Pokemon Unite. This could also be done with movesets, by the way. So you could say that, you know, Outrage Dragonite, for instance, is possibly almost always played with Dragon Dance. I like Extreme Speed on it, but let's say Dragon Dance, Hyper Beam, and Dragon Dance Outrage get most all of the play for Dragonite. Well, if you want to raise the other build out of obscurity, you don't have to do a ton, but you could give kind of a nice little extreme speed buff to Dragonite, and then this would do two things. It would elevate this build out of obscurity, and it would make Dragonite more played as a whole. Now all of a sudden you're kind of making this thing more relevant. I think when you're looking at a balance patch, you want to, again, address the painful things, and they address most of them, and then you want to address a lot of the obscure things. You're not going to be able to touch every single Pokemon inside of a balance patch. Like, I guess you could, but I mean, we're talking about like full game updates at that point, and it kind of wrecks things when you're in the middle of a tournament season. But you could mess with 10 Pokemon. 10 Pokemon that just simply don't see a lot of play, don't get a lot of love, haven't been relevant in a while. You could do a lot better at messing with those Pokemon, which is why the Pokemon they messed with in this patch, the Scizor, Scyther, Charizard, Greedent, all nice changes. I think they could do more Pokemon and more aggressive changes on things that are really just not getting play. Now, I talked about earlier about enhancing fun on Pokemon, and I don't really think they did much of that with this patch at all, outside of nerfing things that were really egregious. That does make the game more fun. No question, being stuck in Mean Look is not fun, so if you make Mean Look worse, that can make the game more fun. When I think about making it more fun inside of a balance patch, it reminds me of sort of the really nice changes that they've made for some Pokemon over the years. Charizard actually springs to mind. Early on in the game, Charizard, when it used Flamethrower, it used to have to stop, use Flamethrower, and then continue moving. The ability to use Flamethrower while on the move was such a massive buff for this Pokemon, not only from sort of a balance perspective, because it just made it easier to move in and out of combat and kite. It also made the Pokemon so much more fun, and it was so much more interesting to use. I think they can take opportunities inside balance patches to balance for pain, balance for obscurity, and then also like balance for pleasure, balance for fun. Find some things in the game that are just not that fun to use and make them way more interesting. Even if you're not making them way more powerful, make them fun, easy to use, like something that makes you smile when you are doing it, I think is really important from a balance perspective. We haven't really seen a lot of great changes like that in a while. In fact, as I go through a lot of the recent patches inside of Pokemon Unite, I really do think the biggest fun factor change is probably just lowering Unite move cooldowns across the board. Many Pokemon have Unite move cooldowns that have been lowered, and I do think that increases the fun factor. It just lets you use your Unite more. It lets you have bigger moments inside of a lot of the battles inside the game, which I do think is cool, but I think they could absolutely spend more time focusing on what would make the game fun inside of these balance patches. So in that sense, the last few patches I'd give maybe like a 1 or 2 out of 10 when it comes to making the game more fun. Maybe like a 3, because again, they did nerf some of the difficult things that just make the game frustrating for everyone. And as I talked about, I think it's a good idea for a balance patch to sort of elevate Pokemon to have moments. Again, we're not always going to have every single Pokemon be relevant, but it is interesting to have a meta where you go, oh wow, this meta, this Pokemon is particularly good. Now you have to be careful because you don't want a Mewtwo meta or a Mew meta or a Mime meta or a Miraidon meta or something with an M, okay? A Metagross meta. You don't want a meta that is so gross. You just don't want that. But you do want a meta where you go, wow, I mean, this buff to, you know, this Pokemon is so good. This buff to Decidueye is really nice. And now you're seeing a ton of Decidueyes inside these games. That would be a really ideal position. You, of course, don't want something buffed so hard where it's making everything else unplayable. I think a good example, while it was extremely powerful, is Dragapult. So Dragapult is great. It recently received a small nerf. It's still doing very well. When Dragapult got buffed, it was a bit of a monster, but it was nothing like Mewtwo Y. It was an auto attacker that was snowballing games, that was punishable, and unlike Mewtwo Y, it didn't have all these get out of jail free cards and a global ultimate and all these things. It actually felt like, yeah, Dragapult is for the first time in a long time having a moment inside this game, and it actually works. Like, is it a little overpowered? Yeah, it definitely is. In solo queue, it's a bit of a beast for sure, but it's having a moment rather than completely taking over the entire game. And I think you have to thread that needle very, very carefully, but you can do it. And when you do, you create kind of an exciting dynamic where every couple weeks, which we could talk about here in a sec, but every couple weeks, you have sort of a new powerful shift that you're all kind of playing with rather than a new overpowered nonsense thing that you can't beat. I just mentioned every couple weeks. I do think balance more frequently. You don't want it like 2 weeks, but every 3 or 4 weeks, like every month, if they had a balance patch for the game that was pretty solid. We're kind of close to that. If you had a balance patch that did all of these things on about a monthly basis or so, I think you'd have a really, really healthy state for Pokemon Unite. And of course, you know, routinely moving in with emergency nerfs in case something gets out of hand, right? But in general, I think that's what you would want for the game. And this also just gives you the opportunity to do what I mentioned before, which is simply shake up the meta. Just have metas that are more interesting, more dynamic. Have a meta where a Pokemon that we haven't seen in a long time really becomes something dominant. I think it could be a very good thing for a game. Pokemon Unite, outside of their legendaries, and it really is mostly their legendaries, not only, but mostly, has been pretty solid on balance for the past, like, 4 months or something like that. Basically, since the end of Mewtwo Y, we had solid balance up until Miraidon. We had like that Metagross week or whatever, and we had Mimikyu's Play Rough was like crazy good for like a week or something like that. But in general, they've had pretty solid balance. However, it could get even better, and I think I've kind of laid out how. Let me know what you think in the comments. What did I miss? What do you think would make the game even better from a balance perspective? I love you all. I will see you all next time. We did it.